Oh, hello. You caught me relaxing here after a busy week at UMDCYL headquarters. We had, let's see, our first match on Monday, first match ever, which we'll talk about in a minute. And we had our first new technical challenge, that's teleporting. And of course we had our first major bug and technical hurdle, which took several days to work out, sort of inevitable with something like this that we're trying to do on the fly. And our first post-match recap video, and you're watching it. So we have 3 items of business to discuss. The first, I'd like to know if it's okay with you if we import your tanks from the arena match into each school arena. So the idea here is that you'll be able to see the tanks you competed against and that you submitted to compete against other tanks in your own school's arena, so you can actually see how your new design stacks up against the last match's design. This is supposed to be about learning to program and competing, and I think this would be really helpful for our helping people learn and see how the other tanks' designs works and so on. So please vote. I don't want to do this unless the majority of the competitors agree to do this. So some of you have told me. If you haven't, please let me know. And if everyone, or if we've got a majority, then I'll do the import. The next piece of news, of course, is there's a new match on this Monday. So that would be, let me just make sure I have the date right. That would be Monday the 18th. Okay, and the cutoff for submission will be at 6 p.m. with the final game at 8 p.m. And that'll be in a new arena. I will set that up and send out an email. So it'll probably be at like Arena 2 or something like that for the second match. Okay, and finally, let's do a recap of last games, the tanks designed, how teams performed. So let's go to the videotape, or I guess go to the H.264 lossy encoded video stream. Alright, we're talking about recapping match 1 from UMDCYL 2016. And what I thought I would do is apologize in advance if I cough. I kind of have a cold, so don't mind that. But what I thought I would do today is go through the best round of each tank in reverse order and talk about something that the tank did well and maybe something that the tank could do to improve in a future match. Okay, so we're going to start with Washburn Castle Guards, who came in 11th place with 4.19 points. Okay, so their best match, they got 5 tanks in 1 round. So if we click on this, we can see the round, and this is Washburn here. We can see Washburn does a good job. Washburn is actually in the lead. It wins this round. And we can see at this point, the blue tank is going to chase Washburn around until the end of the match. And if you look down here on the slider, you can see there isn't another hit at any point in the rest of the round. So all the real action happens down here at the beginning. So again, we'll watch Washburn is down here. Washburn does a good job of sensing other tanks, reacting to tanks, and getting them. So let's watch it. So it's very good when another tank comes into its sort of front end zone here. It does a good job of getting around, and in fact, we see, again, most of the action happens very early in the match. So watch Washburn makes quick work of several tanks in a row. So it does a good job. And then, of course, again, this just chases each other around. But one thing that, looking at the design, that I thought might help Washburn is more sensors. So using more sensors, in particular, this front area is good for kind of scooping up tanks that happen to wander into the zone. But it looks to me like Washburn probably has more sensors that it could use, and that would allow the tank to react more quickly, more specifically if tanks are maybe outside of just dead of center. Okay, so good job, Washburn. Now let's look at Chisholm, the Chisholm Blue Streaks. They did just slightly better, so 4.9 points out of 100. So Chisholm is this kind of light blue color here. And what I'm going to do here, I'll show you a little trick. you can't really take care of this easily, but I can. So I'm going to change the background of the page to be white, and I'm going to change the text to be black. Now I'll reload. That's much better. Now we can see Chisholm doing its thing, driving around. It's got a very good use of range. So these sensors are full out to the range, so it can respond as far in advance as possible to other threats. It divides its sensor range up into good sectors. And it does a pretty good job in this round. You see these two tanks are kind of stuck in a loop. So I guess that would be my one comment here is Chisholm, you see that your tank does well at targeting and finding tanks, but sometimes it seems like it's a little confused, not exactly sure what to do. So you might have it make maybe a bolder move, or you might want to make sure that it's not able to get into this situation where it just bounces back and forth. I know, easier said than done, but these are just my off-the-cuff thoughts. This brings us to the Northeast Range Nighthawks, and I believe this is the Nighthawks here, this green tank, and it really makes very quick work of all the other competitors except for the one. It's got an interesting, it's got sort of a front left and front right sensor, a couple closer targeting sensors, and it's using what I would call sort of the radar technique, right, where it sweeps the turret around. So one technique that I haven't seen anyone use yet that I recall is you can actually use multiple turret fixed sensors, but at different angles. So you could have 4 sensors rotating around the tank, and so any one of those sensors triggering could cause the turret to target the attacker. So imagine having, instead of 1, have 4 sensors sweeping around and getting the turret to turn in that direction. Brings us to the Marshall Hill Toppers. Marshall earned 5.8 points in that round. Marshall Hill Toppers is this purple tank. It's got a nice front end sensor and some other sensors on the side. Marshall does a great job in this round with 6 hits. The max, so all tanks, their best round, they either had 5, 6, or 7 hits. So Marshall does a good job. My one comment here, and it could be that this is by design, maybe it's by accident, but again, if Marshall, if you used sensors out to the full range, you might be able to react sooner to incoming tanks. And again, maybe this is by design. So these aren't criticisms, these are just ideas. And Mountain Iron Buell Rangers with 6.54 points. Mountain Iron Buell is this orange tank, and they have a similar, they're using that front left, front right, a rear sensor, kind of an inner range sensor, and this targeting sensor in front. And they're using, it looks like, the full width. So you see here at the end, I'm going to back up. Mountain Iron is able to detect, I believe that's the Nighthawks. Mountain Iron is going to be able to detect the Nighthawks before the Nighthawks can detect Mountain Iron, and that's going to give Mountain Iron this edge here. Watch this. So you see Mountain Iron detected and reacted to the Nighthawks quicker than the Nighthawks did because Mountain Iron's using the full sensor range. All right? So this brings us to our first team that had 7 hits in one round, the Spooner Rails. They had 7.79 points. So Spooner is here. Now they've got an interesting strategy. It looks to me like they're using the full sensor range for the front and not quite full sensor range for the rear sensors. And this is totally reasonable strategy because it sort of prioritizes the front sensors because they're able to see things farther out that are ahead of the tank and closer to targeting. So let's just watch this again and see how they do. So they're not, doesn't look to me like they're turning the turret at all. They're just turning the tank. Okay, so they're aiming by how they turn the tank. Now also, you'll notice Spooner is using a really interesting strategy where they've actually used multiple sensors to fine-tune the steering, and that makes sense because they have this, they're not using the turret, they're actually just steering the tank to target. So by doing this, Spooner is able to fine-tune the tank. Now, obviously this worked well for Spooner, although my one comment would be you can use those fine-tuners to turn the turret as well as the tank. And that actually might allow you to target slightly faster. And every little bit counts in this game. So taking the existing design and maybe adding some turret targeting, so set turret based on the angle of the sensor that's triggered, could be a good strategy for you. This brings us to the Grantsburg Sky Pirates. And Grantsburg has this sweep design. So rather than using a radar design or a fixed turret design, Grantsburg has this sweeping design. And if you ever watched Knight Rider in the 80s, this TV show, the car has a sweeping sensor. That's what it reminds me of. Now, how does Grantsburg do that? Well, they do that using a register. And I know this because I wrote to the team to explain a little bit when they asked a question. And the register value are values that you can store and retrieve every round. So normally the program reruns, you can't keep any state, but you can store little numbers or bits of data in those sensors. So you can have a sensor, register rather, storing whether the sensor is sweeping left or sweeping right, and have it flip mode back and forth when it hits those ends. So that's Grantsburg basic design. And in terms of strategy, I'm not quite sure what to say. Once again, Grantsburg could use multiple sensors instead of just the one sweeping sensor. I'm not quite sure. As the tanks up at the top are doing well, it's harder to see obvious things to suggest. But adding multiple sensors or maybe tweaking the speed at which it sweeps, things like that might be worth looking into. Next, the ESCO Eskimos with 10.78 points. And ESCO is this blue tank here. It's got an interesting strategy. It's able to hone in and target very well. And in this match, ESCO did very well in a short amount of time. So good use of different sensors, different targeting depths you can see here. So there's, of course, it can see if there's a tank in the center area, and then it uses these other sensors almost like feelers, like a bug, to kind of zoom in on its prey. Other ideas, I think ESCO, you could add additional sensors in this front area, like maybe it was, I can't remember which team, but add more sensors in the front, and so you would know right away and be able to zoom in more quickly. Harbor City is this yellow tank, and I'm going to actually flip the color back. So Harbor City has this interesting sunshine approach where they have sensors and a couple little close feelers, rear quadrants. It's obviously a very competitive design. I just wonder, as this is not a criticism, just an idea, it looks to me like maybe you're not using all 10 sensors. Adding additional sensors might allow you to target more directly, and of course these spikes are interesting, but they'll only be triggered if the tank is directly in that area, and maybe that's part of your strategy. Maybe you're using that so that you can set the turret and attack. It looks to me, yes, in fact you are changing the turret angle, so maybe that's part of your strategy. But anyway, a good showing from Harbor City. And I'll change back the contrast for the Fighting Moose and for NLRA. I mistakenly called them Rice Lake. It's actually, I believe, Northern Lakes Regional Academy. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. It's in the Rice Lake School District, but it's a charter school. So let's look at the Duluth Fighting Moose. So Fighting Moose is the gray tank here. Just had to identify it. So here's the Fighting Moose. And they're using, let's see, how is that tank working? So they're turning both the turret and the tank body, I believe. They've got multiple sectors for fine-tuning aiming. Are they turning the turret, or are they just turning the body of the tank? I'm not sure, but if they're not turning the turret, that would be one suggestion, is to use set turret to increase the reaction time of the tank. But obviously a great showing, 14.75 points. And finally the NLRA Wizards with 17.42, so quite a bit better. NLRA is obviously the team to beat, so let's look at their tank. And they have a very interesting strategy. So all this that I've been saying about using the full sensor range, maybe you should take that with a grain of salt, because NLRA isn't using the full range, at least for most of their sensors, but they're obviously doing quite well. Each one of these sensor ranges clearly has a behavior. You notice that NLRA does use sets the turret, and they are using multiple turret locked sensors. So this front comb is locked to the turret, and these other sensors, it looks like, are used for maneuvering. So NLRA doing quite a good job, and they're definitely the tank to beat. So anything you can use from this recap or anything else you've seen could be really helpful to improve your own tank designs in advance of the competition on Monday. So that's it for our recap. Again, NLRA in the lead, followed by Duluth Fighting Moose, Harbor City, and Eskimos, and the Grantsburg Sky Pirates round out the top 5. Okay, so great job, everybody. Really looking forward to seeing what you come up with this time around, how you use that teleport feature. Will you use it to escape? Maybe you could use it to escape only if you can't fire, or only if you have attackers on multiple sides. There are a number of different ways you could use teleport to make your tank more effective. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you do that. Will NLRA stay on top? Will we see an underdog come from behind? Only you know. It's up to you and up to your program. So please give your best shot, and we'll see how things turn out on Monday. Thank you.